And some of the background knowledge, some of the things that we know based on federal law and state law is that federal law does not protect gifted programs. They leave it up to individual states. There's also no universal agreed definition on what is gifted. In the state of Tennessee, gifted programs are mandated and provided through IDA. So we look at gifted more as a disability, and we look for not only characteristics of gifted, but also is there educational impact in the classroom before we serve kids that are gifted. So my research questions were, what are the perceptions of teachers regarding the support of intellectually gifted learners in general education classes? And I also wanted to know, what are the strategies of choice used by general education teachers to address not only academic but social needs of these intellectually gifted learners? And where this came from and the problem, the reason why I want to know these things and investigate these things was recently with the No Child Left Behind Act, it seems like teachers are very standards-based, and they're being held accountable for those students that are low achieving in their classrooms, and they're not addressing gifted kids in their class. And we know from research that gifted students start the school year, most of the standards they've already mastered, and they're not making gains on state testing. They're doing really well, but they're not making gains from year to year. Most of these students spend the full day in general education classrooms, and we know that they have unique needs. And I know specifically where I am, the services are starting to be impacted by budget cuts because we're really trying to support those struggling students. So the purpose of the study was as a qualitative study, just to investigate the perceptions of general ed teachers, see what strategies they're using, because that's our key support for gifted students. And I did this through surveys, focus groups, and observations with these teachers. Really just wanted to know, how did they define gifted students? What kind of planning do they do? What kind of accommodations? How do they feel about serving gifted kids in their rooms? All right, so the literature review. Gifted has been thought of over time in different ways. Some people have looked at it as a good thing. Some people have looked at it as it's not something to be revered. But in the United States, Louis Terman, I pronounced that right, is the father of gifted. So he took the Binet test and changed it up and wanted to measure IQ. And this started with educational psychology. So this is the first time that profession, it was started looking at what kids can really do cognitively. He paired up with Hollingsworth, and she actually started the first class for gifted, and that was in New York. They started a longitudinal study, and that was the first research that we had that was over a long period of time that followed these kids in classes. But still, there wasn't much going on as far as in the government until the launch of Sputnik. And then we started to get a little panicky, and we wanted to support math and science in the United States. And we started to fund those programs. So we didn't fund gifted, we funded math and science programs. And then Cindy Marlin was the commissioner for education, did a report that really talked about what is giftedness and how we need to support that. And then there's been other reports to follow that says that we're still not competing globally and that these kids are not being supported in the classroom. So we talk about gifted students. There's two different types of characteristics or traits that we look at. And we look at them intellectually, but we also look at them socially or in their affective domain. So some of the things that we know is that they do have an above average IQ. In the state of Tennessee, just recently, we've decided that that is 123 and above. It used to be 118, and we've moved it up to 123. And we know that they learn faster than others. They have unique interests. They're really quick to go synthesize information, go from whole to part. But we also know on the other side, socially, that their development is asynchronous. So while they do have a high IQ, socially that might not match. And they struggle with some anxiety. They struggle with perfectionism, wanting all things to be perfect and just right. They have a unique sense of justice and wanting things to be fair. A lot of times they get very concerned with what's going on in the world around them, and don't have the skills to handle that stress. Typically, how we've served kids who are gifted, there's two different ways or two different prongs. Segregated is when we pull these kids out of the typical general education classroom. We can serve them in a pull-out model where they come out maybe for an hour a week of enrichment. That's typically what I'm familiar with. And research has shown that that's the most common way in elementary school to serve kids that are gifted. We also can accelerate them by subject area. Some kids move up, so even if they're in 5th grade, they might be doing algebra and be in a higher level math class. Or we provide advanced opportunities. And all of those are when they're pulled away from their same age peers. And then in general education, there's a variety of research-based strategies from differentiation, compacting, project-based learning, and some other things there to accommodate in general ed. So when we think about our theories of giftedness, Renzulli focused on gifted behavior. He didn't focus on the person, he focused on the behavior. And he really believed that there are 3 prongs, or he's called them 3 rings, and they all interrelate. That you have somebody that has a high IQ, which he determined was 120 or higher. They also have creativity, but the 3rd ring is task commitment. So you had to have commitment to task. You had to have a drive or a desire to learn and to have those creative products. So not just the IQ. He also did a lot of research and believed there were 2 types of giftedness. You have the kids that are schoolhouse gifted that are really good test takers. They're really good at school. And then you have the kids that are creative that don't really fit the model of school, but they're able to use their giftedness to solve real world problems. So they're always looking at issues. Renzulli's answer for gifted education was he created the school-wide enrichment model, where he embedded higher learning opportunities in general ed. He thought all kids benefit from having these opportunities. And so there were different tiers. He called it the triad model. So every student got exposure to a topic that they would be interested in. A lot of times these are community members that would come into the school and teach a specific topic. But then the gifted kids, they got more individual independent study with that project, or they even got mentoring and got other opportunities. So they had different enrichment clusters. All right. Gagne had a similar model, but he believed his was the developmental model of giftedness and talent. And he believed that kids are naturally gifted, that they have an aptitude for the IQ or the ability to develop talent. And he considered it to be in 2 trios, that you have the natural ability, and then you go through a process to develop talent. So just because you have the natural ability, if you weren't given the opportunity to develop your talent, you would not in the end have the talent. He also believed that your natural ability was affected by interpersonal things. Your personality can affect how well you achieve or whether or not you develop your talent. The environment that you're in, so the classroom, the school that you're in, your home life, what you're exposed to at home. And he was the first theorist to put chance in there. He said there was a lot that we can't control. Heredity, for one, that you can inherit giftedness. He also started looking at gifted at a level of 120, but he rated it in a system that went from mild to extreme, and he said extreme was extremely rare. It was up in like the 140s. And both of these theorists agreed that gifted is above average ability, 120 or up. It has to do with creative products or talent, but those can be encouraged and developed. And so gifted education, as Gagne said, is a provision for developing talent. And then they both agree that gifted students have unique needs and they're impacted by their environment. All right, so for my study, to answer my research questions, I wanted to collect information from, or data from, surveys, observations, artifacts, which were the lesson plans, and a focus group. So my survey I sent via Google Forms, and I sent it to my grade, to the grade level chairs in my research school. So the grade level chairs are chosen to be over their particular grade level. They lead their grade. So I sent 9 surveys, K through 8th grade. I had 8 of those returned back to me. And they had combinations of questions. They had some Likert questions, they had checklists, and they had some open-ended questions just to learn more about their perspective on gifted education. From the surveys, 8 were returned. I chose 5 teachers based on some of their survey answers to observe. Really, I looked at not every grade level chair currently had gifted students in their classroom. So I wanted to observe in classrooms that had gifted students this year. And so I chose the ones that had more than 2 gifted students in their classroom. All 5 teachers I chose to did not feel like they were serving those kids well on the survey. And so I scheduled times to observe, and I went and I looked at their lesson plans prior. They all sent me their lesson plans prior to the observation and reviewed those. And then I went in and I used the Accessing Children Differentiation Protocol, which is from the National Association of Gifted Children. It's designed for administrators to use to go in to check for differentiation for gifted students. And then once I did that, I pulled a focus group. So all 5 teachers were invited to the focus group after school. Only had 3 attend, even though all 5 said they were coming. But we had really good conversation. It was after school, and we focused on, what are their strategies and what are their struggles with gifted education. So when I analyzed all the data, it was a lot of information. And I had looked at the surveys first, and I read through them multiple times. I printed them so I could make notes on them, color-coded them with the different times that I went through, and I was just looking for key information. The focus group, I audio recorded, and then I transcribed it and took notes and underlined. I color-coded things based on whether or not it was a strategy that was mentioned, whether or not it was a feeling, whether it was a request or something that they needed, and just any way I could sort the information. For the observations and the lesson plans, I specifically looked for and used, I looked at the research strategies, the differentiation, and the definition of that, and I underlined things that matched each of those research things, like compacting, acceleration, that was listed in my general education research. And then the observations, I used that pre-done assessment. It was a really good tool. It looked every 5 minutes. You compared what was going on with the identified kids to the unidentified kids. And, I just set my watch, and every 5 minutes did that information. So ethical considerations. Of course, I had permission from my district, from my school, and from the teachers that participated. I left the teachers, I took their names out, assigned them a letter for confidentiality. I used a peer debriefer. My peer debriefer was my school psychologist, and she does all of our testing for gifted in our building, and also in an inner city school. She's not just assigned to my school or to the research school. She also we're trying to start RTI for gifted, so she's in that process. So she read through everything. I sorted all of the data, and then I had her look to just make sure that she saw it the same way that I saw it. I was pretty disappointed with my results, and so it was helpful to talk through with her about what I had seen. And then I used member check for my focus group and my observations. They read through the transcript. After I observed, I talked to each teacher to make sure, to clarify my observations, make sure they agreed with what I was seeing. And that seemed to help. And then I'm going to share the research with my research results with the research school. We have a summer institute every year where we come in for a week in the summer and we do planning. And my principal is going to let me share the results and do some training based on the things that we saw. Recently, just last week, I was asked to lead a cohort next year on training teachers to do RTI for gifted, based on some of the things that we've seen. My school psychologist, after she read through my report, suggested that with administration. And possibly they're looking at changing my role to be over gifted in my building next year. So we'll see how that goes, but all of the results are coming from this. So there are some limitations. It's a small school. I only collected data in January and February, and there was only one observation per participant. I would have liked to observe at different times during the day. Even though I had their lesson plan for the whole week, I would have liked to observe a little bit more. So my findings, this is hard for you guys to read. But the first question was, what are the perceptions of teachers regarding the support of intellectually gifted learners in general education classes? And the first thing I looked was just look at how do they define gifted. And they, on the survey, I asked them to define in their individual words, like if you define it, what is it? And I wasn't surprised to see that most of them talked about high cognitive abilities and advanced thinking. I expected that. I thought it was interesting. The one participant said the ability to see multiple solutions to a given problem, and looking at that creativity, that creative thinker aspect. I was kind of surprised, well, a little bit surprised, on a survey that a teacher had put, they're not always a good student, and put good in quotes. And it, explained that they aren't the kids that make the good grades, and they're the kids that are kind of acting up in class. To get that for that, seeing some of the affective affect. And it was kind of, another one that stuck out to me was that the gifted students get along fine. They get along fine. They don't advocate. They're fine. They're making straight A's. They're okay. And they don't, while they require challenges, they're not asking for more challenge. But so most of this, with a high IQ and being a creative thinker, I expected some of that. And to continue the first question about their perspective, when kind of asked what, in the question, do you plan for these kids, these students, how do you feel about it? They mentioned over and over and over again that it's time. We don't have enough time. It comes back to time. But one thing that stood out to me, this one was, it's not expected. And if it was expected, or if it was a requirement, it would happen. And they said it's not expected on their lesson plans. They also mentioned multiple times they have no background. They have no education. They don't know what to do with these kids. And then, so that was for the no time to plan and the lack of training. They mentioned it was very repetitive how many times they said they would like help. They would like support from a specialist. One teacher in particular said she needed a sounding board to come up with ideas on her lesson plans. If this is the lesson and this is the standard, she said she needed somebody to talk to about to see where to take it, because she just didn't know what to do. And for question 2, which looked more at strategies, what are the strategies of choice used by general ed teachers to address specific academic and social needs. Most of this information came from their lesson plans and the observations, whereas the first question was answered a lot by the survey. This came from those lesson plans and the focus group. And it really, almost everything was differentiation, but differentiation of the product. So it was very limited differentiation. I watched some writing, and it's like they expected everybody else to write 2 paragraphs, but the identified student should write 3 or 4 paragraphs. So it was just more or more extensions. Something else that stood out to me on this one was, I released them to master other math. So the teacher releases them to go on and sit on Khan Academy, or there's something called Freckle. I wasn't familiar with that until I did the observation that she puts her students on. So the teachers were differentiating. There was some project-based learning, a lot of student choice. There was some compacting, like where she released them to master other things. But there was nothing, when we looked at social, the teachers all recognized, and they would say, you know, that I'll tell them, hey, you can't talk to people this way when they're doing group work. But there's nothing that, it's all in the moment. There's nothing pre-planned. They weren't grouping the kids together. If they had one class I observed had 7 gifted students, and they were all in different groups for doing the work. And I thought that would have, you know, I was surprised they weren't doing any cluster grouping and those kinds of things. So the conclusions from the data for category 1, gifted is defined by general education teachers as those with a high IQ. They're creative thinkers. They do have effective impact, and they all agreed that they require more. And then they are not meeting students' needs because they have a lack of time, they have a lack of background, and they don't have any support. They would like support in their building from a specialist. And they said several times that, you know, we have RTI, all the struggling students, we have special ed support, we have RTI support, but we don't have the same level of support for our kids that are gifted. And then on question 2, the strategies of choice was differentiation, project-based learning, compacting, and there was nothing planned socially. It was just like in the moment strategies. The differentiation was still a low level of differentiation. It was differentiating the product. And the project-based learning that I observed was mostly just giving them a choice. There was a lot of projects, but it was more giving them a choice on within the project of what they were going to do. So conclusions. General ed teachers do identify gifted students. They know who's gifted in the class. They know who are the high achievers, but they're spending less than 30 minutes a week thinking specifically about these students. There's no requirement that they think about those students, at least on their lesson plans. And they just said multiple times they want assistance. They want assistance for serving these kids. So when I think about implications, we both know just from the research that Renzulli and Gagne, they said talent can be developed, but to be developed, it's got to be provided for. And it's provided through gifted education. So if gifted education is going to help happen in general education classes, then professional development needs to happen to teach gifted research-based academic strategies and social strategies. We need inclusion of gifted students on lesson plans, or that to be supported by administration, so teachers get in the habit of thinking that way. And then we need collaboration and planning between general education teachers and a specialist or a gifted teacher, somebody that is trained in that area. And so some recommendations for the study, I would like to, if it was replicated, for it to go longer, more observations across time for each subject or each participant. I mean, I go back, I was disappointed in my data and what the conclusions were. I really thought I was going to see different things. And I feel like at a different time of the year, I might have seen a little bit different things, just based on the type of school my research school is. So I'd like to see that look different, a little different. Because the teachers they kept saying it would be different if we had support. I think it would be interesting to do a study to implement a coaching model for gifted and see if that actually changes what it looks like in the classroom. In the end, will it really make a difference? So in summary, we've had multiple reports that say that gifted students require special programming. We're still not competing globally. No Child Left Behind, there's no provision for gifted in No Child Left Behind. Teachers are only being held accountable for the struggling learners, and I think they're becoming very overwhelmed. In that, I heard that a lot. Renzulli and Gagne really support their theoretical framework support gifted programming. We need, as students with high abilities require a change in school environment. And I said, ultimately, I feel like the students are still waiting on change. There's not been change. And that's it.